We talk about toxic masculinity, but we rarely talk about what women are told to become in response to it. That's toxic femininity. And no, it doesn't mean girls being manipulative or catty. It's not a mirror opposite image of what's become colloquially known as male toxicity. What I'm referring to is an invisible rulebook women are given for survival. I'm jourdantravers, a licensed psychotherapist, and today I want to break down how the nice girl trap keeps women imprisoned in a cycle of self-suppression and silence. In 2020, Dr. T.H.H. Herbst did something deceptively simple. She studied 24 senior women leaders, academic professionals at a top-tier university who had already broken through the glass ceiling. These weren't aspiring managers or mid-level staff. They were deans, directors, department heads, women who were, by every external measure, successful. But here's the twist. She wasn't measuring their actual performance. She was studying something far more fragile, their self-perception. Using interviews and self-assessment tools, the study explored how these women rated their own leadership and how those self-ratings compared to how others saw them. What she found was devastating. Even with power, respect, and years of experience behind them, these women still struggled to see themselves as leaders. Meanwhile, men were far more likely to rate themselves as highly competent, even when their peers didn't see them the same way. And this wasn't a one-off fluke. It was a pattern. Because the deeper the research looked, the clearer it became. These weren't just differences in self-esteem. They were the echoes of socialization. These women had learned to tone themselves down, to be cautious, even in areas where they clearly excelled, to avoid being seen as arrogant, bossy, or too ambitious, even when their skill was obvious to everyone else in the room. This is what toxic femininity does. It makes women shrink and second-guess themselves. And then, when it comes time for a promotion, a raise, or a seat at the top, they're passed over. Not because they lack ability, but because they've been trained to disown it. Here's what the study makes heartbreakingly clear. Toxic femininity is a system of behaviors that teaches women to disappear. It's when a woman's thoughts, actions, or choices serve everyone else, usually men, while her own needs die quietly inside her. It's not about being nurturing, it's about being erased. And just like toxic masculinity, it's a role performed for power. Toxic masculinity says, be dominant, be feared, take control. Toxic femininity says, be desirable, be quiet, don't fight back. Men are taught to control. Women are taught to appease that control, to survive it. So both men and women perform these roles to stay valuable, to stay wanted, and stay safe. Now, let's break down the traits of toxic femininity so you can see it for what it is. But before that, don't forget to hit the like button and to subscribe to our channel. First, docility. This is the quiet surrender. You're taught to be agreeable, easygoing, obedient. You don't have preferences, you have flexibility. You're not allowed to lead, and you're told it's better to follow. She's the girlfriend who says, it's fine, whatever you want, even though it's not fine. She's just afraid he'll leave. Second, hyperfemininity. You must perform the ideal woman perfectly. Soft, sexy, sweet. And if you deviate from that image, you're punished. Too loud, you're abrasive. Too confident, you're a bitch. Too sexual, well, you asked for it. You're told your worth is fragile and your femininity is always on trial. Like the coworker who wears baggy clothes so she won't be too much in the office. Or the woman who hides her ambition because she's been told it's unattractive. Third, policing other women. This is where the trap tightens because women start enforcing these rules on each other. Criticizing the ones who stay single, shaming the ones who choose not to have kids, mocking the ones who speak too boldly. You get rewarded for keeping other women small because deep down, you've been taught that there's only one room for a woman at the table. It sounds like she's trying too hard or she's not very feminine, but really it's fear dressed up as judgment. Fourth, sabotage, disguised as sisterhood. You're taught to see other women as threats, so instead of supporting them, you undercut them. With gossip, with rumors, with subtle exclusion, all to gain the attention, approval, or protection of a man. Like the friend who flirts with your boyfriend when you leave the room, then tells you that you're being too sensitive. Or the coworker who badmouths you to the boss just to prove that she's the cool one. This is what toxic femininity looks like. It's dressed up as niceness, but it costs you your voice, your confidence, and your freedom. And unless you name it, you'll spend your whole life thinking it's just who you're supposed to be. And this is where things take a really dark turn, because this performance doesn't stop at how you talk, dress, or work. It follows you into the most intimate parts of your life, even when your body becomes a site of compliance. You start saying yes when you don't mean it. Not because you're being forced, but because you've been trained to abandon yourself quietly. In her 2018 paper, Why Didn't She Walk Away?, psychoanalyst and researcher Naomi Snider did something bold. She looked at both private therapy sessions and public #MeToo testimonies to ask a question most people are too afraid to touch. Why do so many women say yes to sex they don't want? Her paper isn't built on surveys or stats. It's psychoanalytic and theoretical, which means she's not tracking numbers. She's tracking meaning. She draws from feminist psychoanalysis, trauma theory, and her own clinical observations. The women she studies are what we would consider empowered, well-educated, articulate, politically progressive. They weren't naive, they weren't powerless in the obvious sense, and they weren't the kind of woman we typically imagine when we think about coercion. They know what consent means. They talk about gender, power, and boundaries with nuance. But in that moment, their moment, none of that knowledge could protect them, because what was operating wasn't logic. It was a deeper, more primitive blueprint. Here's what Snider believes happened. The woman froze, not by fear of violence, but by fear of disapproval, of disappointing someone, of making things awkward, of being seen as too much. Snider calls this internalization of toxic femininity, a relational conditioning that teaches women over time that their job is to be agreeable, to prioritize connection over truth, to preserve the other person's comfort, even at the cost of their own safety. And in those moments of unwanted sex, it's not always a loud no that's missing. It's the sense of having the right to even feel no in the first place. Because many of these women weren't just disconnected from their voice. They were disconnected from their desire. Their discomfort showed up as confusion, self-blame, or emotional shutdown. They'd think, maybe I led him on. Maybe it's my fault for coming over. Maybe I just need to get through it. And then afterwards, they'd leave feeling hollow, shameful, complicit, like they had betrayed themselves, but couldn't quite explain how. Snider's point is that this isn't a failure of consent education, it's a failure of relational safety, because the pressure doesn't come from one man or one night. It comes from a lifetime of being taught that a good woman makes things easy, and that saying no is selfish, dramatic, or mean. This is the subtle violence of toxic femininity. It doesn't just teach women to smile through the pain. It teaches them not to recognize pain as pain. And here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. You don't break free from toxic femininity by being a better woman. You break free by being a full woman, unapologetic, inconvenient, whole. That means saying no even when it disappoints people, taking up space even when it makes others uncomfortable, and trusting your discomfort before you rationalize it. Because when you silence yourself to keep the peace, you don't just lose your voice, you lose yourself. So ask yourself, honestly, where have you been performing connection instead of actually feeling it? Sometimes that realization is too big to face alone. And if you need support, real grounded support, this is what therapy is for. And tell me in the comments, what's one part of your life where you feel like you've been shrinking? I'll see you in the next video. Bye.